Welcome back to part 2 of our Totally Cooked Energy episode, speaking with Roger Dargaville from Monash, an expert in energy systems and climate change. If you missed part 1, jump back an episode to hear the beginning. Otherwise, welcome back to Totally Cooked, the climate and weather podcast.
This is so interesting. I want to work in civil engineering or renewable energy communication next.
You can't leave us.
Well, after this.
Do a master's in power systems engineering and you can name your salary. It's the most in-demand job in the renewable energy sector at the moment, power systems engineers.
What does that, so I mean, what kind of discipline is that? Is it engineering and...
It's electrical engineering.
Yeah.
And power systems engineering specifically.
So I can't count. Would that be an impediment to that
Yes,
work? Yeah.
Very mathematical.
I also don't like coding or software.
Also a problem.
Yeah, I think it may be not for me. Like, I like to write silly stories and make videos about other people's actual work. That's... Yeah.
And also make fun of them.
There's a big limit on the ceiling of salary there. I think I've reached it.
I used to teach a degree here at Monash called the Renewable Energy Undergraduate Degree, which is sadly no longer.
Sorry, Roger.
For the tape, that was me putting my armrests down. Sorry.
So I used to teach an undergraduate degree here at Monash on renewable energy, and we put a lot of power systems engineering into that degree, and the students complained quite a lot because they wanted to learn about wind farms and solar farms.
They're not complaining now, are they?
Because it was a renewable energy degree, but all of the graduates from that program, there's unfortunately only 30 or 40 of them, all working for Ausgrid and other power systems companies, solving really interesting, challenging problems, because that's one of the skill sets that is really highly in demand.
Power systems engineering is also conjuring up images of like Olympic deadlifts and, protein shakes. Like, I don't know, power. Yeah.
I didn't go there.
Electrical
That's what
power.
I'm thinking, yeah.
Electrical power.
I went for nerdy electricians. That's what I had in my mind.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, all right. Random question on AC and DC power. This is purely for my own indulgence. Why does DC power fry my battery in my car when I charge it?
What do you mean fry?
Well, so a fast charger, car charger is DC.
Right.
At home, you charge on AC, even with a slightly elevated charger. But you shouldn't charge your EV too much from a DC charger.
What do you mean too much?
Well, I guess we do it every time we do a long drive.
Right. But you shouldn't do it
wouldn't wanna
often?
That's what we were told when we bought one of our cars.
So, your battery stores power in DC. There's actually a flow of electrons going into the battery and being stored in the lithium ions. That's how it stores power. So you actually need a flow of electrons rather than AC. They're just wiggling backwards and forwards.
Okay, cool.
So your battery has to be, by definition, a DC system.
Right.
When you are pushing electrons into that battery, the harder you are pushing, so that the higher the current, the more degradation you have to the battery cell.
But why?
You'd have to ask my PhD.
Because you're stressing it. You're stressing it out.
Tanya.
You're pushing it harder. It's using it up faster.
Yeah, so it degrades the membrane between the cathode and the anode. That's about as much detail as I can say.
It's about as much detail as we want as well.
Batteries will naturally degrade with time. We all know that our laptop battery stops working after a couple of years.
2 days.
Yeah, something like that.
Hope my car's
and so it's because the chemistry within the battery, it's the membrane that controls the flow of ions is gradually degrading with time. And when you fast charge it, you accelerate that degradation.
Right. Okay.
Now it's not that dramatic. And in fact, driving your car, when you're discharging the battery, you're sending much more DC power out of the battery.
Yeah, okay.
So when people say, what should I do to make my EV battery last longer?
Don't drive it.
Now, obviously, that's not particularly practical. So you got to drive it.
Interesting.
But if you're going to drive it, fast charging it is not nearly as bad, and slow charging is better. But what we're seeing for most electric vehicle batteries is the degradation with time is less than what was anticipated.
Oh, good.
They're actually
that's a relief.
Across the market doing better. And the battery, there are different forms of lithium-ion battery chemistry, and that the battery chemistry that degrades the least is becoming more favorable, and so we're seeing even lower degradation rates.
I want to ask a question about car batteries. So my cousin has asked me a couple of times when we've done call-outs for questions and answers about car batteries, and she's heard that car batteries are very bad for the environment when they reach the end of their lifespan. Can you clarify what happens to an electric or hybrid vehicle battery when it's no longer viable?
So the lithium has become degraded in the battery, and so it's no longer that useful as a car battery, but it can still be used as a stationary energy storage system, so it can have a second life. You keep on using it, but eventually it will get to its end of life.
Do they have second lives? Have we got to the point yet? What happens when a car battery is no longer useful as a car battery?
So there is an industry which buys used electric vehicles, extracts the cells, puts them into a stationary energy battery, so stationary energy storage system. That's sort of a cottage industry that's starting to grow. I mean, there aren't that many electric vehicles getting to end of life yet, so it's still an emerging area.
Yep.
But to get to your the point of the question, the batteries will get to end of life eventually. You can reprocess the lithium and you can get it back to a purity where it can be put into a fresh battery. But that's a very energy intensive process, much like we talked about before, reprocessing silicon. So to get these metals back to very high purity is expensive and energy intensive. And at the moment, it's actually cheaper just to mine fresh lithium to do that. But when the lithium deposits
run out,
get lower and lower, it will become more cost effective to recycle and reprocess lithium from disused batteries. There's no reason why that can't happen, and it would be much better to do that than to dispose them into the environment, because lithium is quite reactive and toxic.
Sure. And do you know, and this isn't necessarily your specific area, so you may not know, but, you know, for people who have had a Prius for 20 years and stuff, and they're starting to get scrapped and things, what is the standard process at the moment in Australia or elsewhere in the world for, cycling down?
I have no idea.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it?
Yep.
And
I also don't know what happens to a normal internal combustion engine car.
Just get crushed and buried in a landfill or sold for scrap,
It gets melted down and the metal gets used.
Doesn't it get crushed into a cube?
Yeah, according to the movies.
Yeah, that's it. I was thinking of like some Disney movie I've watched at some point where cars probably.
I've got two references for cubes. One is in Goldfinger, where a villain he's like a gangster that doesn't want to take over the world.
Oh, yes.
He gets crushed.
Yeah.
Odd Job kills him, and then his car gets crushed into a cube. Yep. But then my better one is The Simpsons.
Do his feet pop out the bottom and he runs away?
No. It's not a comedy. It's a serious film.
Either.
Well, in The Simpsons, Smithers goes on holiday and chooses Homer to replace him, the least competent person, so that he doesn't make him look bad. And Homer says to Mr. Burns, "Here are your messages. You've got your car is illegally parked. Your car is being towed. Your car has been crushed into a cube. You have 10 minutes to move your cube." And then the phone rings and Mr. Burns says, "Is it about my cube?" Okay, now you actually, I criticised you, Sarah, for breaking the flow, because we were not going to talk about politics and now we are. So
I'm happy to talk about politics.
So the Liberal National Coalition here in Australia, for anyone listening internationally, they are the Conservative Party, the equivalent of the Conservatives, the Republicans, the right of centre party, campaigned for an expansion or for the introduction of nuclear power in Australia during the last election. They did not win the election.
It was a landslide.
A landslide for the other guys.
Yeah.
But other countries have existing nuclear power options all over the developed world. Some places are even building new reactors with mixed results. Thinking of the UK's French-built reactor, which is taking a long time and costing a lot more.
Hinkley Point C.
Hinkley Point C is like, let's build a new reactor. They got the French national,
EDF.
Yeah, the big French power company to build it. It's taking longer than it should. It's costing more than it should. It's not even going to contribute that much to the grid.
Oh dear.
Anyway, I want to talk to Roger about nuclear and whether we should have it here or not.
So I'm not against nuclear energy at all. I think for certain circumstances, it makes sense as a low carbon electricity source. It is inherently safe for modern reactors. Obviously, we've had some fairly disastrous experiences with some older build of poorly maintained, poorly operated reactors, and Chernobyl is a great example of that. Fukushima was another disaster which, depending on how you look at it, was actually a testament to extraordinary engineering, that the power station stood up to a 9.2 or 3 earthquake and actually didn't completely catastrophically break down, but there was a leak of radiation into the environment nevertheless. But modern reactors have multiple fail-safe mechanisms. There is zero prospect of a nuclear explosion. Like, you're not going to get a mushroom cloud type thing from a nuclear power system. It's just not physically possible. It's totally different reactions. There is the problem with nuclear waste, but it's, in the overall scheme of things, compared to dealing with atmospheric carbon dioxide, dealing with a few thousand tons of high-grade radioactive waste is not that big a challenge.
Seal it in a big casket, bury it somewhere deep.
Yep, and it is a multi-generational, long-term problem. It's not to be sneezed at, or the importance of it lowered, but it's manageable. So for some countries, nuclear power makes sense, and if you don't have access to renewables or sufficient renewables, that might be your only option.
Small country with not much wind or rain, not much sun.
Wind or sun.
Yeah.
So
rain.
Japan's a good example. So Japan doesn't have its own fossil resources. That's why it has nuclear in the first place. And as we go to renewables, it also doesn't have great wind or solar resources or availability. So a country like Japan, nuclear makes a lot of sense. For Australia, however, we've got a lot of wind and solar potential, and we can build a low carbon energy system with wind, solar, hydro and batteries that would be much cheaper than building nuclear. There's no need to go down that very expensive pathway.
So it doesn't make sense for Australia.
It doesn't make sense economically. And the other problem that we would experience here if we tried to build a nuclear power station is the technology doesn't match variable renewables. Now, if you had hydropower stations as your alternate source, nuclear and hydro would go together very nicely.
Why do they go together nicely?
So you'd run your nuclear as a baseload power station. It would run steady, constant output, and the hydro could be varied up and down to meet the morning peak and the evening peak. In Australia, we're already running high penetration wind and solar. It's very variable. At times, we can meet all of our demand with wind and solar, and so the residual base load is zero. And then in the space of a few hours, the residual demand, what we need from our dispatchable generators, goes very high, very fast. Nuclear would be terrible at trying to follow that pattern of ramping all the way down to zero and then ramping up quickly. Technologies that do that well are hydro, batteries, and gas-fired power stations. So in Australia, what we're likely to have is we use our existing hydro. We're building some new hydro systems. So the Snowy 2.0 pumped hydro system will provide 2 gigawatts of highly flexible generation. We'll build some other pumped hydro. We're building lots of batteries. And whether you like it or not, we'll probably still have a fair bit of gas-fired generation in the mix to provide that flexibility. Much more cost-effective than going down the nuclear route.
I think this is a question later in our run sheet, but I'll ask it now because it's come up. Can you tell us a bit more about pumped hydro and how that's different from conventional hydroelectricity?
Conventional hydro, you build a dam in a valley and you store millions and millions of litres of water, and you run that water through what we call a penstock, just a fancy name for a tunnel, or a pipe, through a turbine which spins blades much like a propeller to make electricity. In pumped hydro, you have a reversible turbine that instead of it making electricity, it draws electricity and it spins in the opposite direction and it becomes a pump, which is actually how a pump works. And so when you've got low demand or plentiful renewables, you take that excess electricity and use it to run your hydro system as a pump, and you pump water from a lower reservoir to a higher reservoir. So you're storing the energy using potential energy. So energy equals mgh, mass times gravity times height. So the height difference is
I'm going way back to high school.
Yeah, I think everyone who did high school physics knows that the potential energy equals mass times gravity times height.
Okay.
Everyone knows
Moving
that.
on.
Come on. Zach and I are all over that.
I actually didn't do physics in year 11 and 12, so I'm going back to year 9 and year 10. But anyway.
So that's the physics. And so the difference between a conventional hydro system is when the water runs through the turbine, it just runs down the river valley, continues on its merry path. In a pumped hydro system, you have 2 reservoirs. So you need a bottom reservoir as well as an upper reservoir. And you're transferring the water between the two, running it down through the penstock when you want to make electricity and pumping it back up to the upper reservoir when you want to store energy.
And you pump it back up when you have an excess. So it's like free.
Yeah. So in the olden days, before we had renewables, you do it at night time.
Mm-hmm.
So you keep on running your coal-fired power station, or if you're in Europe, you run your nuclear power stations at night time because you don't want to turn them off because they're very expensive to operate. And you store the excess energy in your pumped hydro and you use that to run your peaking stations or to make peak electricity in the mornings and evenings.
I have a question as well about, Sarah, were you going to ask something?
No,
Okay.
I was just listening.
So one thing I wanted to ask earlier, but we probably got onto a different tangent, was the other thing we haven't talked about so far today in this very wide mix of different energy options is hydrogen power. What's the situation in Australia with hydrogen? Are we using it? Is it feasible? Are we building capacity? Tell us about that. In
terms of being used in the energy system, no, we're not using hydrogen yet. So one of the things about hydrogen you need to recognize is that it's not an energy source. It's an energy vector. You can use energy to make hydrogen, to use electrolysis, like we all did in high school chemistry or
Yeah,
physics.
yeah.
You stuck the electrode and the anode in some water and you got bubbles of hydrogen and oxygen as you were splitting the water molecule. So you can make hydrogen with electricity, and if we do it with renewable energy, then it's green hydrogen, so we can do it sustainably. And then you can take that very reactive gas and use it you can either combust it or put it in a fuel cell and get some energy back again. The problem with that cycle is it's very, very inefficient and very expensive. So people are talking about using hydrogen as an energy storage system to take excess electricity during times of high renewable production, storing it in hydrogen and then putting it back into the grid when we need the electricity. That's not really a viable solution. Lithium-ion batteries do it much more cost effectively, as does pumped hydro. So hydrogen, you wouldn't do that. Where hydrogen comes into its own, however, is as a chemical feedstock. We currently use huge amounts of hydrogen sourced from fossil fuels to make fertilizers. So the Haber-Bosch process takes hydrogen and atmospheric nitrogen and makes ammonia, which is the feedstock for fertilizer. Globally, we make huge amounts of ammonia, and it has a big carbon footprint because we use natural gas to source the hydrogen. So if we can make green hydrogen to make green ammonia and green fertilizer, that will significantly reduce carbon emissions. About 5% of the world's carbon emissions come from fertilizer production.
Did not know that.
And the other one is green steel or green iron. So again, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's around 5 or 6% of the world's carbon emissions come from making green steel.
From making green steel or making steel?
Sorry, good point. Making steel.
Yep.
So if we make green steel, sourcing green hydrogen rather than fossil-based hydrogen. So iron, of course, is ferrous oxide. If you want to turn it into just iron, you have to rip the oxygen off that compound, and you do that using a strong reducing agent. So carbon monoxide is a good one for doing that, but hydrogen actually works for steel making, or iron making. So you can make iron from iron oxide using hydrogen.
Interesting.
So we can't use hydrogen to get the silicon we need for solar panels?
Unfortunately not. The bond between silicon and oxygen is really strong, and hydrogen is not a strong enough reducing agent to do that.
But
so carbon monoxide is. Actually, I mean, there is another compound, aluminium, actually would be possible as a reducing agent. So aluminium has a very, very high affinity for oxygen. It'll rip oxygen off anything.
Yeah, right.
Problem is, to make aluminium from bauxite requires a lot of energy and carbon too. So you actually haven't won.
But green hydrogen is an option for making steel and iron, like heavy industry processes.
So because we have to decarbonize steel and fertilizer eventually, hydrogen is the logical way of doing that. And so that's where hydrogen is going to fit into the mix. Not as an energy storage substitute, not as a natural gas substitute, possibly for some transport uses like heavy freight.
Yeah. Like how, given what you've just explained about how hydrogen can work, how would it work in a fuel cell for transport?
Yeah, so you essentially have an electric motor in a truck, and the electricity comes from the fuel cell, which is sourced with hydrogen to make the electricity.
Okay.
So the reason why you do this for heavy transport is you can have quite a large hydrogen storage container, so a high pressure vessel. You can store quite a lot of energy in that, more than a battery in terms of weight. Yeah. And so you can get a lot more energy from your hydrogen process. The problem is it's much more expensive. Another advantage is your refueling is much faster. Yeah, okay. So with these big trucks, they need to be on the road virtually 24/7 to pay for the high capital cost. They need to refuel fast. So batteries is a bit of a challenge for that. So hydrogen fuel cell trucks could be possible, but we're actually seeing electric battery-powered trucks doing a reasonably good job already. Yeah. So I think hydrogen has a bit of an uphill battle to be competitive with batteries, even for heavy freight.
Sarah and I should probably disclose at this point one of our biggest sources of hypocrisy, which is that we're here telling everyone that every ton of carbon dioxide matters, and we love flying. I live on the other side of the world from my family. Sarah likes to fly around the world to talk about climate change every month.
How ironic.
What are the options for decarbonising or reducing our reliance on fossil fuels in the aviation industry?
So liquid hydrogen as a fuel source for aviation gets talked about. That's possible, challenging. Batteries for planes, especially long-haul flights, is probably physically impossible. The weight of the battery is just, you can't get the plane off the ground. What's likely to be the best option, at least in my mind, is kerosene substitutes, so-called SAFs, sustainable aviation fuels, where you take a sustainable carbon source, so a biogenic carbon source, so biomass or potentially direct air capture carbon, and you, through fairly standard lab or chemical reactions, make synthetic kerosene. So that's very possible, very expensive, and the bio source of the carbon is controversial. So depending on what you use for the carbon source, if it's a food crop, for example, you're now competing with food supply chains. A lot of the biogenic sources are quite diffuse and unreliable. So, I mean, they're very seasonal in their availability. So you've got to store large amounts to get you through the seasonal cycles. It's very problematic still. Lots of challenges there.
Will we have carbon neutral aviation at scale in our lifetime?
I don't see why not. It's possible. It'll come down to whether we decide that's something we're prepared to pay for. So I asked PhD students, always ask PhD students these tricky questions. How much more expensive would a plane ticket be if you ran the plane on SAF rather than conventional fossil kerosene? And they said, well, the fuel is about half the cost of running a flight compared to the capital cost of the plane and the cost of paying the pilots and the crew. So if you triple the cost of the fuel and it's half, then we're looking at about doubling the cost of the airline ticket.
Yeah, okay.
Look, I would travel.
It's not outrageous.
I would travel twice as less.
Half
as much.
I told you I couldn't count. If it meant not destroying the world.
Yeah,
right?
Or I'd pay the money, right? Like
sure.
If
you've got it,
double the cost to go to whatever meeting next. Fine, take my money. Like it's for a good reason, and carbon footprint all the way down.
Yeah, so it's doable. It's just much more expensive.
Sarah, I'd like to direct you subtly, perhaps on the tape or off it, to the section that says "Ready, Set, Go."
Gosh, there's a lot of words there, Iain.
I know you love it.
I'm just going to read it and sound like a robot.
Arguably a bigger challenge than the climate crisis.
Unlikely. So I've been telling everyone recently that every tonne of carbon dioxide matters, and that basically we need to keep all fossil fuels in the ground. But we are seeing time and time again, particularly in Australia, that our government is approving all these new fossil fuel projects. And we also just can't turn all of these projects off tomorrow and turn our reliance off fossil fuel off like that. So how do we balance our addiction to fossil fuels with a quick transition to renewables?
That's a really, really big, tricky question.
Discuss.
And look, I don't really have the answers. It's absolutely true that we can't turn off fossil fuels overnight. And these are incredibly big, expensive systems that you cannot rebuild overnight.
Yeah.
The legacy that we have from evolving the system to be what it is with the dominance of fossil fuel, it's not something you flick the switch on overnight. So it's going to take a long time to do that transition.
I guess, look, it is a bit of a tricky question to throw at you, a bit of a tough one. But something that I find so frustrating about all this is, and I say this all the time, we've been talking about this for decades. We've been talking that this is an issue and fossil fuels are an issue for decades. It takes time for change to happen. And it would have been so much cheaper and so much more efficient to start that change even 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30.
But I'd say, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, you know more than me, but I'd say 20 or definitely 30 years ago, climate scientists were saying this is a problem.
Yeah.
Yes, people weren't listening properly, but also realistic solutions were not at scale at that point.
But
10 years ago, you're right. I mean, especially in Australia, I think we're 10 years behind where we should be because of political
people were having
opposition.
Solar panels. Like, yes, they were less efficient, but solar panels were appearing on people's rooftops almost 10 years ago, or longer than 10 years ago. We had the climate wars around the freaking carbon price over 10 years ago. So it's not like, I'm obviously very frustrated by it. It's not like haven't had discussions about moving away from fossil fuels.
Well, fundamentally, it comes down to money, right? So whether you're at a private investor or a national government sort of scale, you're looking at the options of reducing the carbon intensity of your operations. And you can go green electricity, you can put in policies to reduce your transport emissions, but they come at a cost, whether it's a political cost or a financial cost. And you look at what the cost of inaction is, and that's a can you can kick down the road, and it's someone else's problem.
It's a shitty thing to do, though.
Yeah, but we all do it, don't we? We all sort of go, I should get up and go for a run and go to the gym. But
I do. That's why I was late.
Yeah.
Speaking as someone who hasn't been to the gym this week,
or I could maybe do that next week because it'll be easy next week for sure. So we have a natural temptation to put off
I get your point.
the hard things to later on. And climate change, and Ross Garnaut described this as a diabolical problem, and the word diabolical is a really great word here because the benefits that are reaped by taking action to reduce carbon emissions are not seen by the people that bear the cost.
Yeah.
It's this intergenerational, international problem that the countries that benefit from burning fossil fuel and have done so for decades are not the countries that are most vulnerable to the most important impacts of climate change.
Absolutely.
And if you're a middle-aged white male, typically running an industry, you're not going to see the benefits. You're going to be dead by the time it's a problem.
It's sad because it's true.
So I mean, that's the fundamental problem and why climate change has been such a big, difficult problem. Things like the Paris Agreement, where some very clever politicians very diplomatically worked out that voluntary diplomatic processes to try and get countries to agree to reduce their emissions was a much better way than the Kyoto process, which was trying to do it with legally binding targets. Because the realization is that the only way this is going to work is through mutual agreement that we all try and act in concert to reduce the overall impact.
Carrot rather than a stick.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The Paris carrot rather than the Kyoto stick.
Yeah. So, we're starting to see signs that we're going in the right direction. We're definitely seeing huge uptake of wind and solar.
Yes,
exponential growth.
Yes.
It looks like maybe the emissions from coal in China have peaked. Maybe. We'll still need to wait for a few more years of data to know whether it is
this has
the
come
peak
around.
or not.
Yeah, I've heard that the last few years. So
Yeah, it's not accelerating
okay.
much, but it just hasn't quite started to come down yet.
Yeah.
But China, the Chinese government, we were talking about benevolent dictators before, whether it's benevolent or not, they actually are better at doing long-term planning because they don't have to worry about the politics of difficult decisions so much. So they recognise they've got to reduce their fossil fuel emissions, but they're not going to do it at the cost of their economy, which is a line that people say a lot. But they also know that the cost of climate change to their economy will be significant.
Yeah.
So they will get on board. They will reduce their emissions eventually. It's just, as we said earlier, not happening as fast as it needs to.
And they know that if people starve in famines and natural disasters caused by climate change, they'll be out. Do you know what I mean?
No.
So the Chinese, I'm doing air quotes for the tape, Communist Party is like a really weird kind of hybrid of autocracy and gangster capitalism and some communism, but like their incentive is to remain in power, and to remain in power they have to tread this really fine line between creating a middle class, increasing wealth, making sure that the economy functions and the conditions are livable, otherwise they will be overthrown or ousted by other people within the party.
What happens in China is critical. China burns more coal than the rest of the world combined.
I did not know that.
Burns all the coal making our solar panels, solar panels.
That's right. Yes, they
Your
do
car.
also. Yeah.
All the coal that we ship off to them.
They make the world's steel. They make the world's solar panels. Exactly so.
We were joking earlier about free market versus command structures, but Adam Smith would be loving it if the invisible hand of the free market economy solves the climate crisis. Adam Smith was an Enlightenment economist who believed in not getting involved, just letting the market sort its shit out. And as things stand, particularly in the Western world, particularly in the US, I have more confidence in free market economics and the viability of renewables than in the government there to do anything useful,
That's a good point.
Well, the only reason why that's possible is because market interventions with subsidies to make wind and solar cheaper have advanced that technology to the point where it is now cost competitive with fossil fuel without subsidies. If you hadn't had the market interventions in the first place, the cost of solar would never have come down.
Take that, Adam
so much.
Smith.
So the market externalities still have to be taken into account. Free market's not going to do it on its own.
Strike one for socialists, Sarah.
You tried to stand up for them.
So we're running out of time now, and
I'm really enjoying this conversation. I've learned so much.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. And
you don't need to meet with your PhD student today.
No.
Well, we still have time for one more section, which I have creatively described weathering the storm.
And we can't see that.
It's on the last page. We have talked to Aileen a bit about this, which is the concept of weather resources. So to summarize, the climate's getting hotter. It's changing our weather. We're going to have more heat waves, points at Sarah, heavier rain when it rains, but less overall, perhaps stronger storms. There's a great irony here, which is that we're relying on the sunlight, the wind, and the water to power our lives and our economy, but those conditions are changing and may become more volatile. So what are the risks that these types of high-impact weather events poses to an energy system that will become increasingly dependent on the weather.
So as we go to a higher penetration renewable system, it becomes more distributed. So in our traditional coal-fired power stations, you have a few very large coal-fired power stations connected with very large capacity transmission lines, and it's relatively simple. With renewables, you've got wind and solar farms scattered all over the countryside, and you've got lots and lots more transmission lines at relatively low capacity, but bringing all that power back to the load centres. So you end up with a system that is more vulnerable, more exposed to weather events. And we've seen on a number of occasions in the last few years, wind events that have brought down transmission lines. And so the South Australian blackout in 2016 was a great example where some squall lines with mini tornadoes simultaneously took out several transmission lines, led to a statewide blackout. A couple of years ago in Victoria, we had a big wind event that simultaneously took out high voltage lines to the west of Melbourne and knocked out a lot of the distribution network in the east of Melbourne in the hills. So there was sort of a double whammy of wind events there. So as we go into more energetic, extreme climate events, this is a potential risk. On the upside, because the system is more distributed, it actually makes it, while it's more vulnerable, more resilient, if that's possible at the same time. Because if you do lose a few of these lower capacity transmission lines, you've hopefully still got enough capacity from the rest of the system to keep it going. When you're very reliant on one or two transmission lines and you lose them, then the system is very vulnerable. So, yeah, sort of pluses and minuses there.
So would we need to do something like building more solar and wind than what we actually need, just as an insurance policy, so just in case some weather failed or took something out? Or
energy systems, regardless of whether they're renewable or not, always have spare capacity.
Okay.
Because you know that a transmission line can be lost because of technical reasons or structural damage. Coal-fired power stations can trip off for a variety of reasons. So you always have to have an extra 10 or so % of what we call spinning reserve operating in the market. And of course, we have peak demand days, which typically are on our hottest summer days where the demand goes much higher than the long-term average, and you have to have spare capacity to do that. And so we do that with things like open cycle gas turbines and even diesel generators, which are very inefficient and expensive to run, but they're cheap to own. Okay. So you're okay to have them sitting idle most of the time. So the systems inherently have this built-in resilience.
But would we need to increase that 10% to maybe 30 or 40%?
Yeah. So because renewables are much less reliable, so you can have a cloudy day and your solar panels aren't going to produce as much power as a sunny day, you have to build the system for your sort of worst case scenario.
Yeah, okay.
So we do definitely need a big overbuild of solar. But it's not really an overbuild, it's just building the system big enough so that it's reliable.
Yeah.
In the same way that we already have an overbuilt system.
Yeah. Because
it's built to meet our peak demand days.
Sorry, you go.
What's your favourite example of over-engineering a system? I'm thinking straight away of the sewer system in London, which was built in the Victorian era, and they overdid it massively. But fortunately, they overdid it massively, and it still works just now. But this is kind of Victorian England. Why don't we make it 25 times larger than we would ever need? And it's just about still coping, as opposed to when they build a new, road now and it's only got 2 lanes, and you're like, come on, guys.
This is the thing. Every Australian example I can think of does just
underdoing
that.
it.
We had, where I grew up in Sydney, the M2 was this big development. And then literally 5 years later, they're widening this damn road that you pay for.
Just do it properly in the first place, like the Victorian sewer system in London.
We had an example in the power system a few years ago when distribution networks were paid what they called a guaranteed return on investment. So if they invested $1 billion in building poles and wires to deliver power to your home, substations, they would get a guaranteed percentage return. And it was better than what you would get from putting the money in the bank.
Who guaranteed it? The government.
The government.
Yep.
And the idea is that if you allow sort of economics to dictate expanding or building the distribution network, it becomes inadequate and will fail. And when you get blackouts, governments get toppled.
Because they're trying to protect their margin and not worried about redundancy.
It's not as reliable as it could be. And so the government said, well, we'll incentivize investment in the system by providing a guaranteed rate of return, better than putting the money in the bank. And so all these multinationals came in and said, I think you probably need a new substation here and there. And over there as well. And we invested about $40 billion through this.
When did this happen?
It would have been 2014, 15, thereabouts.
Didn't know that.
So, yeah, $40 billion went into what's been called gold plating the network.
That's a nice example of public-private partnership, where
Didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even think that was a thing, public-private partnership.
like a mixed model where it's
Sure, but I thought it was a fairy tale.
So the cost has to be passed on to the consumer eventually. And so power bills went up dramatically. And it was around about the same time as carbon pricing and renewables taking off. And everyone went, my power bill just doubled. Bloody renewables. But it wasn't renewables. It was the network charges going up through the roof.
I read a really juicy article recently, which was in the ABC, and it was about how I think it was Santos invested heavily in the Gladstone project and couldn't get as much gas out as they thought they would. They'd already signed a load of contracts to sell gas to Asia, and so our gas has been more expensive ever since.
Yep, I read the same article.
I think I sent it to you.
Yeah.
Did you read this one, Roger? Or?
So I'm familiar with the problem. So the Gladstone export terminals. So before we started exporting from Gladstone, the East Coast gas supply was just a domestic market. So we've always exported lots of gas off the northwest shelf.
Sarah's favourite project.
Not today.
So gas was relatively cheap because we had quite a lot of gas. Bass Strait was a nice source of gas.
Gas Strait.
Yes. And everything was good. And we were getting gas for about $3 a gigajoule. Internationally, places like South Korea and Japan are happy to pay $10 a gigajoule because they don't have their own fossil fuel, so they pay a pretty penny. Once Gladstone started exporting natural gas, LNG, liquefied natural gas, the gas producers could sell the gas to Southeast Asia for $10 a gigajoule. And so why would they sell it into the domestic market for $3? So because there was no domestic price reserve or reserve market, our gas prices just naturally fell in with the international gas prices, which involved about a tripling of the gas price.
See, what I read in this ABC article, and I haven't fact checked this because I'm not an energy journalist, but what they said was that what the author of this article said was that they couldn't extract as much from a particular investment as they expected, and then there was an undersupply in Australia relative to the global price, and that's why it went up here.
Yeah. So the contracts have been signed to supply a certain amount of gas. So the price went up, but also the availability went down. And even at $20 a gigajoule, you couldn't get a gas contract for a new gas supply. So a lot of gas-intensive industries went under because they couldn't source gas.
There you go. Irresponsible capitalists.
But do we really want gas? Well, I know we need a little bit.
It comes back to what we're talking about transitioning.
Yeah.
And to rebuild large-scale infrastructure. So if you're running a paper mill, for example, paper mills are big users of gas. If it's currently a gas-fired system, switching that over to an electric heating system would be really expensive. You don't do it overnight. You wait until the system's at end of life.
Yeah.
And then you refurbish or replace.
Yeah.
And scrambled eggs. When you need to have a real sensitive,
Did we have
frying.
this conversation
every week?
I
don't know. Is this the induction versus gas
It is. Like, so this is my,
Induction is so much better.
I don't like induction,
Roger.
even really good induction. I don't like pressing the button. It doesn't seem to respond well. It never seems to respond like.
You need a better.
Well, I don't have induction. My parents have had induction in various places, and I never quite get around
you don't know
it.
anything about.
Well, I've had bad experiences with other inductions.
I've had the same argument with my older sister, Claire.
G'day, Claire.
Yeah, just point her out from the rest of them.
Gas Claire.
Claire. She's very gassy.
I'm with you, Claire.
They did these massive renovations. She's got a beautiful kitchen now that I'm quite envious of, but she refused to give up her gas stove.
Crazy.
And it's the only gas appliance they use in their house. And I said, rip it out, put in induction. Like, they've got solar panels now. Forget that. They're really efficient relative to any other source of cooking. She's like, no, can't give up my gas stove.
Roger wrote a very nice piece in The Conversation, which I read ahead of this appearance on our podcast, about how we do need to retain a very small amount of gas for base load. And I feel it's the same way for my scrambled eggs. I think it's just the same thing,
and not for whatever Claire's doing on her stovetop.
What does Claire cook?
She makes a mean lasagna.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, that's in the oven.
I know. Well, you've got to fry the meat first.
Okay.
But I can't. You know what? I couldn't even tell you. She's a good cook, but she could do all of this.
There's
induction.
Zero difference between making the bottom of your pan hot from a gas flame or an induction coil. It doesn't make any difference. You've actually got better control with an induction cooktop, and you're not going to give your kids asthma.
I do have asthma
So do I.
because of all the scrambled eggs.
We didn't have gas growing up, but yeah.
So we're getting into the last knockings of the episode, and I'm conscious of the fact that you've given us a great rundown of renewable energy and the transition for dummies, but there's also a lot of really interesting research going on in your group. So can you tell us a little bit about what your many favourite PhD students are doing right now, and what's happening over there in engineering?
So one of my favourite topics and sort of the original topic that got me into energy research was the question of what does the low carbon energy system of the future look like? So how much wind, how much solar, where and when do we build it? So I've got a couple of my students looking at these energy transition questions of what does the optimal system look like? And we were working on this well before AEMO started producing its integrated system plan, which does the same thing.
Copycats.
Well, we actually worked with them to help build it. So
collaboration cats.
Yes. And they're AEMO sort of locked into a fairly tight scope. They have to follow what they're told to do for their modelling, whereas as academics we can do whatever we like, and so we can do all kind of crazy scenarios. So the students have lots of fun building these optimization systems to look at where you put the wind and the solar. And it's all about the sort of the synoptic weather variability. So how far apart do your wind farms need to be so they're tapping into uncorrelated or even potentially anti-correlated wind resources so that you have a more reliable, sustainable supply of electricity from your renewables, minimise how much storage you need. So that was one of my original projects, and I'm still working on that. And we do it for other countries like Indonesia and India, which is really interesting. Integration of electric vehicles. So whether we charge our EVs at night time or during the day makes a big difference to how we produce the electricity that supplies that. And not surprisingly, in Australia, because of our fantastic solar resources, if the EVs are being charged during the day, it's much more cost effective. The challenge with that is if the EV is being driven, it's probably not at home during the day. So you're not charging it from your own personal EV charger. It needs to be charged from a public charger, maybe at a shopping centre, a parking garage, wherever the car is out and about during the day. So looking at how that infrastructure should be built and how it should be optimised. And we've got a nice project looking at Monash's EV charging infrastructure to how that can be optimally configured. We look at green steel and green ammonia from a life cycle assessment point of view. That's a whole nother topic, although we did talk a little bit about embodied carbon. What else do we do? Battery chemistry, so optimal battery chemistries for different applications. And God, what else is there? There's a few others, but I can't think of them right now. They must be my lesser favourite PhD students.
Dame, you know who you are if you're listening. I'm just thinking now, I did a story about some research that Jacek Jaseniak did when I was in my previous role, which might have been with someone working in your department. It was about, they looked at if you optimized every available surface in Melbourne CBD for both existing and potential PV, how much energy could you generate? And they worked out, this is a little bit blue sky, it's like imagine if we had like building integrated PV, window PV and rooftop solar. They worked out that, and this was for the CBD of Melbourne, it would be something like 70-ish% of its energy needs could be met entirely by solar. And I think that was someone called Jenny was doing that research in engineering, but it maybe was not in your group.
I know Jack's work with, so they're working on perovskites, again we mentioned earlier. Perovskite's what we call thin film technology, different to silicon. It's so thin that a lot of the light that isn't absorbed for the photoelectric effect passes through, and you can still use it. You use it for a window covering, for example. So you extract out that little bit of the solar spectrum you need to make electricity, and the rest you can use to light your windows, light your rooms through the windows.
There's also a company in Perth called Clearview PV where they actually are making glass that is photovoltaic.
That's really cool.
It's like it's electric glass.
If you're absorbing in the infrared, then you don't affect the visible spectrum at all.
Which is cool. Bit expensive,
really cool.
But nifty.
It was good to have all these kind of blue sky ideas. That's how PV started a long time ago.
Yeah, it was just someone tinkering around. Maybe this could work.
At UNSW, maybe.
But Martin Green was definitely a pioneer in the technology. I don't think photovoltaic proof of concept, I think it was in the US somewhere.
Oh, okay. Just in Australia.
Australia was a leader in commercializing.
The original photocells came out of Bell Labs in the US.
Yep.
The photoelectric effect was discovered by mistake or by fluke. Somebody was measuring natural conductivity in silicon, and they found a charge coming when silicon was exposed to light, and they couldn't work out why. And eventually they did finally work out that there was boron and phosphorus in this piece of naturally occurring silicon, and that was causing what we call the doping effect that actually allows a current to flow in the semiconductors. But it was just a fluke that they happened to find this piece of naturally occurring silicon that had boron and phosphorus in just the right amounts in it.
And this is why you need blue sky research, more air quotes, like just investigating things for the sake of it. Because, some people, some governments, some funding bodies want to make scientific research more like
structured and tailored,
more commercializable, more inherently commercializable, but it doesn't work that way. Like you don't know what you might be able to commercialize until you know more about how the natural world functions.
Penicillin was a fluke. Alexander Fleming discovered it, and it drastically changed the outcome of the Second World War. And look at where we are today with antibiotics fighting. Like my kids had scarlet fever, no worries, give them some antibiotics. Whereas 80 years ago, that wasn't the outcome. It's changed lives.
Fascinating. I think that's drawing us to a natural conclusion, and I have had a really great time nerding out on all this stuff.
Me too.
It's been so interesting, like a great departure from our normal weather and climate to a bit more energy-focused connections to weather and climate.
And I think people ask a lot about, well, what can we do? How do we reduce our emissions? So it's great to have you on the podcast. It's
been a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, so thank you very much to Roger for illuminating us about the transition to net zero.
And looking ahead, we're going
complacent.
No,
the majority of accidents happen at the end of a journey.
Well, I told you I'd start swiveling at the end, and it's just all
very good. No, I mean when you're nearly home, you relax. Yeah. Apparently, Sarah often relaxes when she's nearly home.
Looking ahead, we're going to ask how the El Nino Southern Oscillation influences Australia's weather and climate.
What role do oceans play in the Earth system?
And what exactly are clouds?
For the answers to those questions and plenty more, join us for the next episode of Totally Cooked.
And we'll tackle the climate crisis together.
Yeah. Cool.